everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and today we're going to be starting a reading vlog where I read disturbing horror book recommendations that I got from TikTok. If you've been around for a while, you've seen I've done multiple variations of reading TikTok book recommendations. Most of what I feel like many people see recommended to us off of TikTok or Book Talk is romance books. I feel like that is what is most popular on TikTok. Romance and fantasy and everything that intersects in between as fantasy romance books is by far, in my opinion, the biggest niche on Book Talk. I do read romance, but it's not my primary genre, and I have done a couple videos where I picked up recommendations from TikTok that were romance books. Some of them have been big failures and I definitely have hated a lot of those books, but I've also had some good wins from those. There are books that I still have enjoyed from getting romance Book Talk recommendations, so it's really just kind of hit or miss for me there. I also did a video where I read a sort of weird book that I had seen recommended to me on TikTok, where I read the book S, or Ship of Theseus, which is like this sci-fi, fantasy, weird, annotated book full of things that is kind of hard to explain, which was something interesting and just kind of obscure that I had seen talked about on TikTok. But I have never done a video where I read thriller or horror recommendations that I get from TikTok because I just don't get a lot from TikTok. I just truly do not. And so what I've been doing over the past month or so is I've been working to curate my TikTok FYP to give me more horror and thriller book recommendations. Thrillers, I'm still having trouble getting that really well curated, but I feel like I've made my way into horror talk. I'm finally able to see what is being recommended to me on TikTok in the horror book genre. And what is dominating that market, what I'm getting the most of, is disturbing books. That is what TikTok is crazy for right now in the horror niche. The books that will ruin your day, the books that will make you not want to eat dinner, the books that will scar you for life. For some reason, people are loving that on TikTok. And so I decided that I wanted to try it out. I wanted to pick out a couple books that I see repeatedly recommended as these disturbing horror books and try to see if that is something for me. Will I like being disturbed by horror books? Will it completely gross me out? I really don't know. I don't think I've read many books that I would call super disturbing horror books. I mean, I've read Tender as the Flesh, which is definitely a gross one, but other than that, I don't read a lot of disturbing or extreme horror. I tend to read more quiet horror, psychological horror, a little bit of like supernatural horror every now and then, but I don't read a ton of stuff that is like incredibly grotesque and over the top. So what better time to try than when TikTok is trying to tell me to read it? So I've picked out 4 books that I see talked about on Horror Book Talk that are called disturbing horror books that are highly recommended, and we're gonna see how I feel about them. I don't know, I'm kind of scared. The books that I've picked out are Ghost Story by Peter Straub, The Wasp Factory by Iain Banks, Gone to See the Riverman by Kristopher Triana, and Any Man by Amber Tamblyn. At this point, I don't even remember what all of these books are necessarily about. I know that this one deals heavily with sexual assault. This one has to do with a serial killer who is in jail, who hires this woman to complete tasks for him. This one I think is about a serial killer. And this one I imagine is a ghost story, since it's called Ghost Story. Hey, just popping in really quickly. This is post-production Ashley to say that I started reading ghost stories specifically at one point in this vlog, and I wasn't really enjoying it. I was wanting to DNF it. It was pretty boring and slow going. And then I was looking into it more, and I don't actually know if it is a disturbing horror book. I mean, maybe it is. I don't know, but I wasn't fully convinced that it was going to be a good selection for the disturbing video anyways, so I decided to scrap it because I didn't want to read it anyway, and I ended up replacing it with another book which I feel like is a better fit, and that was Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Brite. TBH, I knew this one was a very highly talked about disturbing book on TikTok, but I was also terrified of it because it sounded really intense. I decided to do it anyway. Full send. You'll see how that went later in the video. But these are the ones that I have seen repeatedly on my FYP. These are the ones that I've seen recommended by Baker Reads and Ghostly Reads, who I feel like end up coming up on my FYP the most. They seem to have a lot of backing behind them. If I'm going to be entering disturbing horror books, this seems like a good place to start. Not too far on the like ruin your whole life spectrum, but right around the ruin your day or week spectrum, which is where I feel comfortable starting. So I'm gonna get started with these books. I'm gonna get started first with Any Man by Amber Tamblyn because this is the one that is just speaking to me at the moment. And as I go along, I'll let you know how I'm feeling about the books, how disturbed I am, if it's something I think I'm gonna want to read again. And we'll see if this is something that I should continue curating on my FYP or if I should try to wipe my feed completely.
Can we take a moment to talk about this book, please? This book is so gruesomely brutal, gorgeously written, thought-provoking social commentary. This is about a sort of literary female predator who preys on men. She does very horrendous things to them. Horrendous things. Look up trigger warnings. It's bad.
It really just throws up a lot of really interesting questions about gender, about consent. Yeah, it's pretty heavy, so if, you know, that's not your thing, I would say stay away from this one because, wow.
So I have started Any Man and I'm about a third of the way in. I'm on page 92 and it's very, very different from what I was expecting. Apparently, this writer also writes poetry, which becomes very clear in the way this is written because it very much blends the lines between poetry and prose. And then there's also just like unique elements like email chat messages and just different things throughout the story. And it's pretty much told in vignettes rather than being a straightforward narrative. I'm still kind of piecing together the puzzle of what I'm reading, what the purpose is going to be, and the overarching message, but what we've been introduced to so far is different men who are being assaulted by this woman who's going around and sexually assaulting men very gruesomely, damaging them very, very gruesomely, but you're following the perspective of the men who are healing from this. And she's this elusive figure. And now there's a couple of them that are in group therapy together, talking it out. But I feel like saying that makes it sound like it's a more straightforward narrative than it is. It's really not. It's very like vignette style, piecing together things, written in a very poetic way. I'm enjoying it so far. I'm reading it very quickly. I can't stop flipping the pages. So that's why I wanted to stop and update now before I end up reading the whole thing. I'm also outside with my dog if you hear him jingling around. But yeah, I like the writing style so far a lot, but I am curious what message the story is trying to tell. All right, so I finished Any Man, and it was definitely disturbing. Apologies if it's a little loud. It's raining right now. Got a skylight thing. Makes a lot of noise, but hopefully it's like a nice little ambience in the background for this. But yeah, this book was definitely disturbing. I don't know what I was expecting. I didn't read too much into this book. I didn't really want to know too much going into it. I just knew it had to do with sexual assault against men. But from that, I assumed that it was going to be a woman committing sexual assault against men in revenge, like going after bad men, and for that to be the motive behind it, or for there to be any motive at all. But that was not what this book was at all. This is not a story where you're rooting for the woman. I wasn't expecting to root for a woman who was sexually assaulting men, but you know what I mean? Like, I thought she was going to be harming men who commit sexual assault, but this is a story about this faceless, nameless woman who they end up calling Maud because that's what she uses as a username for one of the times that she gets on a chat app. And she is just targeting any man. It's regardless of race, socioeconomic status, and just does it for the simple act of doing it, as far as you know. And the story focuses on the victim. So you follow 6 different men who have been a victim of sexual assault from this woman, and you see how deeply traumatized they are, how they cope with their trauma, how they choose to move forward in their lives after the trauma, how the trauma stays with them in certain ways. Like, one guy gets to a point where he can't eat like anything because everything just reminds him of that. Like, he can't have oranges because oranges have a skin and skin reminds him of that. And so he just gets really limited in what he can even eat. So I thought it was really well written in terms of, one, just like the prose and the poetry that is infused through here. The story has really great writing, great structure. The vignettes are really effective. And then the more abstract things that come in, like email chats or social media posts, are also super effective. All the characters had a really distinct voice as well. You don't get a ton of guidance into whose narration you're reading each time, but the characters are so distinctly built that you quickly can follow who it is that you're reading from, which is also really well done. And in terms of disturbing, where this falls on the spectrum. Obviously, this has heavy themes of sexual assault, and the things that I found to be the most disturbing were the depictions of some of the terrible, terrible, terrible things that this woman did to these men. As for the rest of the book, I didn't find the whole of the book to be overwhelmingly disturbing to me. Like, I was able to read it all without having to feel like I needed to put the book down, except there were two in particular pages, two scenes where I was like, ooh, that's a lot, and noted that. And I'm only saying that because I was kind of wondering that with reading disturbing books, like, am I going to be able to finish them? What's it going to be like? Is it going to put me in a bad mood? But overall, I was still able to read this one. And I think part of it was just how well it was written. I was really engaged with the writing style of it, and so that, I think, kept me really pulled in. And also, there's like a mystery throughout because you don't know who this woman is. And I feel like that really keeps you reading throughout the story as well. After I finished this book, just talking about it as a book, how I felt about it, I was a little stuck in trying to figure out like how I feel about it. It was a weird idea to me to be reading a book written by a woman that is about an evil woman sexually assaulting men and then following the men's perspectives of them coping with the trauma after. I was just kind of curious why it was framed this way and like what the book was hoping to do. So I read some articles and I watched an interview from Amber Tamblyn after finishing the story, and after pondering more about it and hearing Amber Tamblyn talk about it herself, I think it was a really clever idea. So what she aimed to do in this story was flip expectations on their head to resensitize us to sexual assault, because readers and just people in the world, we're all really used to hearing these stories of women being sexually assaulted by men, that we've become desensitized to it. And so everything that happens in this book, the way social media reacts to what's going on with these people, the commentary shows, the radio shows that end up going on, the true crimeization of it all, happens in real life, but most often it is men assaulting women, and then the women getting blamed for it, you are asking for it, not being believed, and all of the other sensationalization that happens around it. But because you're reading it flipped, and you're reading where it's a woman assaulting all these men and seeing what's happening with these men, it kind of resensitizes you to it. Like, it makes it feel new, but then you realize, oh wait, like I do watch shows where they say things like this and make jokes of these things and make trending hashtags where all these celebrities are tweeting about it, but they're not doing anything about it and problems not being solved. So I think that was a really cool choice to do. This book came out in 2018, so closer to the Me Too movement, which is when this all was sparked. And I haven't heard many people talk about it. I really have only seen it on TikTok recently, and then a couple other people I know have been picking it up recently. But for this to have come out in 2018, I am surprised like I never saw more about this book or heard more about it. Maybe it's just me, but I just had never heard of this, to the point that I thought this was new when I started seeing this on TikTok. I assume this came out this year, but it's 4 years old now, but still so timely and so relevant. So overall, I think this was a well-written book. It was definitely disturbing, but not overly disturbing to the point that I couldn't read it for my barometer of what makes me put a book down. But I don't know how to rate it because it was so disturbing. Like, I feel like I could call it a 4-star. That feels right. So that was Any Man. And now I don't know which one I'm going to pick up next, but I will let you know once I have started another book.
Hi, welcome to this week's episode of What the Fuck Did I Just Read? In today's installment, I present you this.
Hey man, do you want to hang out? You better not talk about The Wasp Factory by Iain Banks again. But have you thought about what it actually means to be a man?
I feel like I can't even really discuss The Wasp Factory without, like, spoiling it, but let me just warn you that this book pushes boundaries. Like, when you think that it's gotten crazy enough, it manages to go even further. And you will not be expecting a good 80% of the things that happen in this book, I promise you.
Okay, so I decided to pick up The Wasp Factory as my next read by Iain Banks, and I started it last night. I got 34 pages in. The font in this book is very tiny and dense and not the most enjoyable on the eyes. So I didn't read too much last night, but I did start the book. And I'm gonna be honest with you, because this is a safe space. This is an honest space. I'm not liking it. I'm not liking it at all. And it has nothing to do with it being disturbing. It is just purely the writing style I don't like. Do not like the writing style, don't like the tone, can't connect to the book, really having a bad time. Didn't know if it was just me, so I went to look on Goodreads as well, and there are so many 1-star reviews of this book. So many people say the same thing, that they can't connect to the tone, they don't like the writing style of the book, and that they just suffered through a lot of it because it was really popular. There are plenty of 5-star reviews as well. Plenty of people do love this book, but it definitely was not rare to see a 1-star review having similar feelings as I do. So that's concerning. I don't feel like it's gonna get better. What the story is about so far, you're in the head of this boy who is supposedly 17 years old, but he reads much younger in my opinion. He reads like somewhere between 11 and 14. Like he reads pretty young to me. His older brother is in a psychiatric hospital, and when the book begins, he is learning that his older brother has just escaped, and there's like tension around that. Like the dad is a little bit worried about that. They think he's gonna come back, and he seems like he might be dangerous, but it also seems like the main character you're following might be dangerous because, as disclosed in the synopsis, which I didn't really realize, he has murdered 3 people so far. So you're in the head of a serial killer. That sounds really interesting, but the tone is just not it for me. I just really don't know how to explain it. Maybe if I read like the opening couple of lines to you, you'll kind of see what it's like. So this is the first page of the book. Chapter 1 is called The Sacrifice Poles, and this is how it opens. I had been making the rounds of the sacrifice poles the day we heard my brother had escaped. I already knew something was going to happen. The factory told me. At the north end of the island, near the tumbled remains of the slip where the handle of the rusty winch still creaks in an easterly wind, I had 2 poles on the far face of the last dune. One of the poles held a rat head with 2 dragonflies, the other a seagull and 2 mice. I was just sticking one of the mouse heads back on when the birds went up into the evening air, cawing and screaming, wheeling over the path through the dunes where it went near their nests. I made sure the head was secure, then clambered to the top of the dune to watch with my binoculars. So it just reads very much like I'm explaining every single thing that I'm doing. It's very overly wordy and it's very matter of fact, and I don't know, I'm just not really loving the tone of it. So adding that to how it is printed, and this being miserable for me to read, I'm just not having the best time with it. So I think I'm gonna give it a little bit more of a chance, try to get in another 20 pages or so, or to whenever the next chapter is. They're very long chapters as well, and I don't know, we'll see. I'll see if I can try to kind of push through. If not, I might try to skim a little bit just to see what happens in the story, see if I get more invested. But yeah, I don't know, so far this one's not really working out for me. I promise I tried, but I could not read more of this book. I tried to read another about 10 pages or so, and I just didn't want to force myself through it. I've been having a pretty meh reading month in general. I really haven't loved a book that I've read this month. I've really only really liked one book, and even that was a little bit outside of what I typically enjoy. I just thought the writing was good, and this book was just gonna drag me down. It was gonna take a while for me to get through, even though it's short, and I just didn't want to read it, so I didn't want to force myself to read it if I wasn't gonna like it. I don't know. For people who have read this, let me know in the comments if you think it really is worth reading. Maybe if you picked it up and you had a slow start with it, but then you thought it was worth it, let me know. Or if you think it's not worth it, let me know, and that'll make me feel better, and then I'll go look up spoilers to see what happens. But yeah, I don't think I'm gonna be finishing this one in this video because I just don't want to do that to myself. So what I picked up next is Gone to See the Riverman by Kristopher, Triana. I started this one tonight on some reading sprints. This is also a short one, and I got to page 76 so far, and I'm planning to read more when I go to bed, which is right now what I'm getting ready to do next. But I wanted to update you while I was getting into the beginning parts of this book. I wasn't really sure exactly what to expect of this story. I knew it was about a woman who has this connection with a serial killer who is in jail, and he asks her to do these things for her, and she loves him, and so she does, and then it gets dark. I expected more of the book to take place with them corresponding and really seeing the psychological manipulation that he has to use for her, but you really don't get a lot of that. You just are told that she really loves him and that they've been talking through letters. You see a little bit of the letters, but the story really starts in immediately where he has asked her to go find this key and to take it to the riverman, and she just sets off and she's going. Her sister is also accompanying her, so she is with her sister as well, who has some mental and physical disabilities, which seem to be the result of an accident from their youth that you're learning about. So that's an interesting dynamic. And they also had a brother who is no longer alive. So she's got some past traumas. She's definitely got some secrets. She's alluding to the fact that she may not be the most morally conscious person. For one, she is writing to a man who was a serial rapist and murderer and saying she's in love with him. And then it also seems like she's made some bad or questionable choices in her past as well, which you don't know what they are yet, but seems like there might be some reveals coming about her past. So I'm enjoying this, but it's not exactly what I was expecting. So I've had to change my expectations a little bit as I've been reading it. I really wanted to see more of like the psychological manipulation and reading the letters between them and him really trying to win her over. Like I wanted to read that part of the story, but you don't really get that at all. You just get, boom, she's going out in the woods with her sister to go complete this task. And then you do get some flashbacks from her youth and then a couple like letters that she sent back and forth with this guy as well. In terms of disturbing factor, I would say this reads like pretty much the average horror book that I would read. There has been one pretty gruesome scene so far, but it wasn't necessarily any more disturbing than a normal horror book or novella that I would pick up. So this hasn't been too over the top for me yet. Curious to see where we're gonna go in the end. Also, this is reminding me of The Fisherman by John Langan. So I'm gonna be curious to see the direction it takes because I feel like it's gonna do something kind of similar to what that book does. That's what I would predict. It feels very, very similar to The Fisherman. But yeah, we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and read the rest of this book because it's pretty short, and I'm gonna read more tonight and then probably some more tomorrow, and I'll check in with you when I finish the book and we'll see if it got overly disturbing, if I liked it, and how the rest of it went. This book was fucked up. This was just not at all what I was expecting this book to be. This was not what I thought I was getting myself into when people said this was disturbing. It's just not what I thought was gonna happen. It was a lot. This one ruined my week. I'm realizing that I don't really know how to rate disturbing horror books because, and you know, I don't mean this, I'm not projecting this on anyone else. I never judge people who love extreme horror, who love disturbing horror, and they give them 5 stars. I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. I get why you would give that a 5 star, like it did the thing for you. You got super disturbed. But then when I go to rate a disturbing horror book, I'm like, what does this say about me? Oh my gosh, yeah, I just didn't know what I was getting myself into with this one. I didn't know, and that's what I wanted. Like, I chose that journey for myself. I definitely could have looked for trigger warnings, content warnings. I'm sure I could have found people out there warning about what is the disturbing thing in this book, but I chose to experience it without knowing that, and oh boy, it caught me off guard so hard because this book makes you think that you know what's gonna happen. It makes you think you know what's going on, and then it's like, plot freaking twist, it is 10 times worse than you even imagined it was going to be. That was the experience that I imagined that I would be looking for in picking up disturbing horror and reading disturbing horror. Like, I'm disturbed. I am thoroughly disturbed. But I will say, as for the rest of the story, I didn't really love the book. I feel like it was a fine time. It feels very much like a 3-star read for me. I really wanted to see more of the correspondence between the woman and the killer who was in jail. That was the type of story I thought I was gonna get, and that was something I was really interested in, when really this ends up being more of the journey. She initially just starts going on this quest for him, and then you get flashbacks of what is her dark, tragic past as well, and what had to happen to her for her to be the type of person to fall in love with a serial killer and then go on this quest for him, is basically the summation of the story. Those parts weren't necessarily what was disturbing. It was more of learning about her and how disturbing she was. Phew, that was a time. So yeah, I think overall this is gonna be a 3-star for me. Storyline, what I typically like to get out of horror, plot, character, etc. just felt like a 3 to me, but I'm thoroughly disturbed. So on the disturb factor, I was fully disturbed. If I was a religious person, I would be going to church to repent for my sins. This book ruined me. This is the best, worst book I've ever read in my life. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed reading this, and I don't know if I'm okay anymore. I'm scared of myself now. What was that? Oh my God, wow. I just read the whole book. I couldn't even stop in the middle to tell you how it was going because I was just so enthralled with it, and I just had to know what was gonna happen and where the story was gonna go. The way the story is described and what I've heard about it is I hear it talked about as these two serial killers fall in love and do bad things together. Similar to how Any Man felt like it was pitched a little more like there's gonna be more action, but then it was actually a slower and more beautifully written book. That's kind of how I feel about this one too. Like that pitch sounds really intriguing, but the serial killers don't even get together until probably like 60 or 70% through the book. It's very slow, it's very character based, and I feel so weird about everything I just read. Wow. So what you're following in this story, you've got 4 main characters, 2 of which are serial killers. One is a vulnerable man, and the other is the vulnerable man's ex-boyfriend who is kind of going off the rails after receiving a diagnosis of having AIDS. I think this book is set in the 80s, right in the midst of all the AIDS crisis. That is very prevalent throughout the book, so I thought that was an interesting element of it that I wasn't expecting. But the story begins with you following one of the serial killers who is in jail, and he escapes prison by going into a cataleptic state. Is that the right word? I'm not sure. Like he basically shuts his body down so that they think he's dead so that he can escape prison, which was just a crazy opening. The opening was so compelling. The voice was so compelling. The voice of all these characters was so compelling, and it's so weird, and I feel so weird about it, and I need to go take a shower. But after he breaks out of prison in London, he makes his way over to America, and he's looking for a new victim. The person he runs into also happens to be a serial killer, and they come together. But like I said, that doesn't happen until later in the story, so it's just really slow moving inside the mind of these killers, inside the mind of this other really vulnerable guy, and inside the mind of this other guy who's dying and is just losing it, and seeing how they all end up coming together. And oh my God, it was brutal. It was brutal. I learned that this is called splatterpunk. I've definitely heard that word before. I just didn't fully know what it means. Don't know if I want to read that again. That was so intense. It was so intense. There were literally times when I was like covering the page because I wasn't ready. I couldn't handle it. Like I do that in thrillers sometimes. I'm like, oh, I don't want to see like the last line of the chapter because it's gonna spoil what the character is gonna say right at the end. I was like, I can't see what's on the page yet because I'm not emotionally equipped to read the next scene. I was cringing. I was vocalizing while reading it, like, ugh, ooh, ah. Like I had to step away from it at times. That was intense. And I feel like that was the perfect book to read for this experience, and especially the perfect book to end this vlog on, because I feel like that is what people are looking for in disturbing horror. That elicited such a reaction out of me that does not happen often with reading, and there is something so thrilling about that. For me, it still feels awful because the stuff you're reading is so bad. Like I do not recommend this book. Please do not pick this book up and say like, Ashley's Little Library, I had such a good time with it and I want to read it. Like, no, don't pick it up. Don't read it. Don't do this to yourself. If you do, don't say I sent you there. I just like can't even wrap my head around this as a genre. I don't know. And again, like how do you rate a book like this? How do you rate it? Because it was written so well. I loved the writing style. The characters were built so fully. I felt so engaged in the story. And then what was happening was so brutal. It's so wild to me. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around it. Like I read it and I was like, I love it, but I hate it. It was great, but it was awful. I would want to read from this author again because their writing style is amazing, but also if it's like this, I don't know if I should ever pick anything up like this again. So I don't know. I am going to quickly call this a 4-star and move on because I don't know. That was Exquisite Corpse. So that puts us at the end of this reading vlog and at the end of this reading journey, and oh my God, what a journey it was. What a freaking journey. I just did not really know what to expect. I didn't know if I was gonna be really underwhelmed and read all these books and say, you know what, it's not like too disturbing. I read a lot of really intense things anyway, so it didn't feel that much different. Or if I would be on the whole opposite side and have to like DNF all of the books. I got through the books, surprisingly, somehow. I got through all of them. Well, I DNF'd one of them, but I got through what I wanted to get through. But wow, what a time. I guess to answer the question of what I was hoping to accomplish in reading these books is to determine if disturbing horror is something I want to seek out again, if that's something I want to listen for the recommendations and actually pick them up. And there's like this weird part of me that feels like I do want to, because now I feel like it almost put me in sort of like a book hangover where everything I just read was so intense and elicited so much out of me and was such an experience that now I'm like, what do I pick up next? Like, I've got these books on my TBR and I'm like, well, this looks boring. This is about like a VR thing, or this is just a thriller about a haunted house. Like, oh boy. And I don't know. I just feel like I get the intensity and I get why people pick up disturbing stuff, because it is just so intense and it does elicit such a reaction. And I feel like it's going to take me some time to figure this out more. I didn't think I was going to accomplish this all in one reading vlog, reading a couple books. I never really do with figuring out genres and subgenres that I'm interested in, but I'm just really interested to explore more, I guess, because I don't know how I fully feel about it. Like, I feel like what I read horror for most of the time is to be subtly reminded of real life horrors. So books like Any Man by Amber Tamblyn, I felt like is a great example of the type of horror that I gravitate to, that's got a really impactful message behind it, that reveals the horrors of everyday life, that has a message behind it. What I found in reading some of the other books in the disturbing horror genre is I don't always feel the morality there. Sometimes it just feels gratuitous for the sake of eliciting shock, which maybe that's what splatterpunk is meant to do. But I'm like, do I want to read that? I don't know. Because it just makes me feel so weird in the end if you read a book about like serial killers killing people and by the end they've killed more people and they're just live, laugh, loving it up. That was the book. Like, that's not what happened in all of the books that I read. And there were consequences faced in different ways for different evil people in the different books that I read, but not always. Also, I found that common themes are a lot of violence, especially sexual violence, and especially against children and animals. And the sexual violence against children thing was the toughest part for me to handle repeatedly. It kept coming up in several books. So that seems to be something really common and not something I'm particularly interested to read about at large. If it's like mentioned in a book, I guess I can like move past that quickly, but I don't want to read books that contain a lot of that. I don't know. I'm just simmering on so many thoughts. There's so much going on up here. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read these books, what you think about them. Do you read disturbing horror books or extreme horror books? What do you find that you like getting out of them? What have you found that you don't like getting out of them? Let me know all your thoughts down below, because I'm definitely going to be thinking about this subgenre more, and I'm sure I'll still pick up a couple more books at least to try to figure out if this is something I want more of. I don't know. There's so much to simmer on. And if you want to leave an emoji down in the comments to let me know that you got to the end of the video, let's do the skull emoji in honor of Exquisite Corpse, because skull corpse makes sense to me. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.